let's take that as an opportunity to dig into Group F. Croatia sitting in first place, 4 points, +3 goal differential. Morocco in second place on 4 points as well, +2 goal differential. Belgium in third place on 3 points and -1 goal differential. And then Canada, 0 points, -4 goal differential. That officially eliminates them from the potential of getting out of the group here at the 2022 World Cup. But Alphonso Davies in the second minute, the fastest goal of this World Cup, and it's the first goal in Canadian men's national team history at the World Cup level in their second ever appearance after waiting 36 years. Bobby, Canada going home, but still a lot that there's excitement about amongst Canada fans.
Yeah, if you are around this Canadian men's soccer team, if you are in Canada who follows this team, you have to feel really good and proud about what you saw in these 2 games. Because I think to put into context, if you live around the world and you did not know much or anything about this Canadian men's soccer team, you do now. And that impression, that thing you know, is positive. You have to be impressed with the way they approach these games, the technical ability, the mindset around it. And I am always cautious about making broad statements about turning a corner or about finally getting to a new milestone. But it feels like a safe statement to say that this Canadian men's soccer program has turned a corner and they are only going upward, and they are now in the legitimate conversation about soccer teams in that tier around the world. And that is a huge accomplishment for what they have achieved in the last few years. And the fact that really what I think is the poster boy, the catalyst for this progression the last 2 years, Alphonso Davies was the first men's player to ever score in a World Cup for Canada, is also fitting that he gets that honor and that memory moving forward.
Yeah, I can't disagree with most of what you said. And throughout this day, I've gone back to what did we all say 2 weeks ago and a month ago and 2 months ago, and when the draw happened, about what Canada had to accomplish and what the goals were. And I think most people said, prove you belong on the world stage, prove to yourself, and then prove it to the rest of the world, and try and break this team out, as I said, of your niche into mainstream Canadian culture. And the way they performed against Belgium, obviously the viewership numbers that we're hearing already out of that game and what we expect on now a weekend game rather than a weekday game for this team. I think the respect you heard from Kevin De Bruyne and Tata Martino and Roberto Martinez and all these people around the world now seeing this team pretty heavily, as well as the experience these players will take in that they belong here, that's all mission accomplished. So there's a lot that Canada has to be proud of, has to be excited about. And that's a lot of what we heard coming out of the first game was pride. Yeah, it'll be a little more muddled, I think, right now coming out of the second game because of the scoreline, because of the way some of it went, but I think people will come back around to that, and they still have an opportunity to make it even cleaner. If they go and win against Morocco and put up their first ever win, they could still come out of this, I think, even more positive than where they stand, and we'll talk more about that later. But you mentioned Alphonso Davies. I think you have a lot of players. Davies is an interesting one because he is the face of things. I think for everyone else who there was question marks of could they function at this level, they've had self-belief and proof, right? Alistair Johnston, we're hearing the rumors. Tajon Buchanan already going to Europe, even more rumors now. Kamal Miller. So many of these players that don't have experience playing at the highest level, they got their World Cup experience. They got to play and show that they can compete. To me, the biggest thing from the way we see things, or at least what I get to see from behind the scenes a little bit more, is this is not a golden generation or a fluke or a one-off. Canadian soccer has changed. And I think this team is just a sign of that changing time.
So I mostly agree with that. I'm going to add the caveat at the front. It is a little bit of a golden generation when you have Jonathan David, Alphonso Davies, and Tajon Buchanan all within like the same, 18 months you get these guys. You can't count on that. No matter how good a sort of a conveyor belt of talent you have, especially with a talent like Davies, you could have a 100 years of history and not have a player as good as Alphonso Davies. So there is an element of a golden generation, but what is really, really important and what really has helped turn the corner, in Bobby's words, look, 15 years ago, the USSDA was instituted. That actually coincided with Toronto FC becoming a professional franchise, coming into MLS. And a couple of years after that, Montreal came in and Vancouver came in. And if you look at the vast majority of this national team, these are guys who have either come through academies, come through the USSDA, come through MLS to one degree or another. And then you look, down the road to Canada's U23s and their U20s and U17s, and you're seeing guys who have that background. And it's the same thing as what we've seen with the US, where the vast majority of this group of US players, these are guys who have had high level training. And that didn't used to exist in Canada. And the Canadians that we speak to, the experts, whether it's former players like Patrice Bernier or Josh Cloke, the great writer for The Athletic, guys who live and breathe this stuff, they say like this is just night and day from 20 years ago. Like Atiba Hutchinson played today. He probably shouldn't have, but he played today. The team that he started his professional career with folded 20 years ago. Like that doesn't happen anymore for Canada. This is now a soccer country where players like Richie Larea had 3 years with Orlando City and then got cut. And if Toronto FC didn't exist, like he would have been retired at 25, or he would have been unattached FC. And that it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen like that for Canada anymore. There's a pathway. So while this top end is it's inexplicable how they ended up with Tajon, David, and Davies all at once. Like it's such a great dice roll. It's such good luck on all that at once. Like what's really important is that the rest of it is sustainable. There are going to be more Ishmael Kones. There's a Jaden Nelson or a Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy coming through in Toronto. There's hopefully a Mateo Campagna coming through in Vancouver. Like this works. They're doing the things that great soccer nations around the world, they're doing that now in Canada. And when you have that level of talent and you have that level of know-how, the talent, it doesn't just dry up. More of it comes through. And now the next challenge for Canada, whoever's in charge, be it John Herdman for 4 more years, or if they go in a different direction, is to make sure that you can be clear-eyed and ruthless when you need to be about integrating the next generation of these kids. That's a struggle. We've seen the U.S. struggle with that over the last 20 years, none more so than in 2018. But it's something that they're going to have to do because it's like Ishmael Kone is not going to be the last surprise who comes through in the 2020s. Like there is going to be some other 19-year-old kid who suddenly gets on the field for one of these teams. And you're like, oh man, we got to get him into the national team setup as quickly as possible. And this is the exact problem that Canadian men's soccer has never, ever had. Mm-hmm. They've never had this because they've never had that conveyor belt of talent. It's here now. Is a disappointing day, but there's so much to be optimistic about for the next 4 years and beyond.
Bobby, let's talk about the game here. Because 4-1, so it wasn't exactly what you wanted. They start with the goal. What did you see from Canada here in game 2?
We saw the pros and cons of the concept of bravery. For the most part, when teams have gone out and tried to press and tried to play and had real intent to what they're doing, we've applauded it. And we've said, good for you for being brave. Good for you for demonstrating what you're capable of. And for the most part, it's worked out. And this was the opposite of that. This was a team and a coach that said, once again, we want to press. Once again, we're okay stretching ourselves. We're okay going numbers down or 1v1 in certain situations. And for the first 10 minutes, it looked like it was going to work again, right? It worked for 90 minutes against Belgium. It worked for the first 10 minutes against Croatia. And then we saw the flip side. And then we saw why every country who is an underdog doesn't try and press and play at the World Cup. And Canada just got exposed. Right? Croatia is really good. Croatia is coming back from making the final of 2018. And the two things I want to hone into, okay, because we can use this word bravery. We can talk about the concept of real positive intent. But the two ways that I thought it manifested itself were defending high, right? Not drawing your line of confrontation at midfield, but stepping both your forwards and your defensive lines higher. And then really trying to get an extra attacker on the field, putting Kyle Larin into the lineup, defending in what looked to me like a 4-4-2 defensive block where you take out the third center back and you add an extra attacker, which may or may not have been for shape as much for talent, but it showed a real positive intent from John Herdman. And that, along with the high defending, really just punished them in the end because Croatia is a really good team.
Yeah, it verged at one point from bravery to Russian roulette, because what got Canada here was being brave in those transition moments and then dropping into a block and being so difficult to break down. We saw it all throughout qualifying. We talked about this on the show, I think last night, when we were, they shouldn't want to have more than 30% possession in this game. But they came out, and I think, maybe they were just so intent on putting on a show and maybe a little bit high on their own supply when it comes to, like, they were so good going forward against Belgium, but we could do it again, that they couldn't dial it back, but they needed to. And I was shocked, not that they came out on the front foot, but that after it was 1-0, and you get to the 10th minute, like, why are you even crossing midfield? Like, invite them forward. You know how to defend. You know how to make your CONCACAF, for God's sake. You know how to make teams miserable. And it's what got you here. And the weird thing to me was, I think we saw some of it. When they were dropping, they were going into that 3-4-2-1, right? It wasn't just a straight flat 4-4-2 block, right? There were signs that they were just, like, maybe a little bit confused about what their shape was supposed to be when they got back. And because of that, Luka Modric and the entire midfield, which is so good, they started finding more time and finding more runners. And no team in the world can handle Croatia when Modric is out there dictating everything and finding runners.
I know John Herdman blew it. It's part of the good and bad you're going to take. He has gotten this team to believe they are better than who they have ever been. He has gotten them to a point they've never gotten to. He has dealt with a lot outside the field to help them get there. He has flaws and he has strengths, similar to Steven Eustáquio, similar to Alphonso Davies. Like, that's the nature of not being Brazil all the time, is like everyone who's great at something is going to have flaws. It's John Herdman's job if he wants it after this. I have no doubt in my mind. I don't know if he will, but I just would say, leaving that, yeah, these were some of the bad things that happened, and we saw it with the women's team as well in 2015, but they're only there because of a lot of what he accomplished.
I just want to magnify again what you just said, David, because this is what felt really important to me to add, is to keep this moment in perspective. Because, Matt, I don't think you're wrong that in hindsight, the approach was not right. And yet it is important to remember that Canada was always the underdog in this game. It would have taken an immense effort for them to have gotten a result out of this. And we have applauded other countries, other coaches for taking outside the box approaches to what they were doing. I think if the US had lost on a goal, a late goal to England, we would have looked back and said, why did Greg Berhalter go a man down in midfield? They got the result. It worked out. So in general, I am definitely okay with going outside the box. It didn't work in this. Herdman didn't adjust around the 20th minute early enough, but I do just want to put into perspective that it was always an uphill battle. And I am okay with the fact that he tried something new to catch Croatia off guard. So looking forward with this team, because it is important to note that this is a start and definitely not a finish, right? Especially with 2026 World Cup coming and games being played in Canada. So where does this Canadian men's national team go from here? And what should we keep an eye on over the next 1 year, 2 years, 4 years?
So I think the next year, there's a few interesting things to look at. A big one is going to be dual nationals. Can you take the momentum of being on the world stage and Alphonso Davies and Jonathan David and Tajon being guys that people want to play with and go and win some of those battles earlier than you ever have before? It's going to be tough, because I think outside of Nations League, you can't really cap tie guys. But we know the talk around Jebison. We know Luka Koleosho. We know some of these other players. Canada's a player now that they've never been before. Part of that is because of the environment Herdman built, that it feels more secure to go into this group. And the CSA still has its issues, so that hasn't gone away. But also because of the same reason the U.S. was able to convince Yunus Musa and Serginho Dest to join them, because Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie and Christian Pulisic are your recruiters now. It's not just the guys in the federation showing up to a club and trying to meet a young person. So I think for Canada, that has to, and that's not a negative, by the way. I don't want that to be like youth development's not strong enough. A lot of these players are developed through Canada, and a lot of players in the past have not played for Canada because it was just such a mess and it seems so hopeless. So I think Canada has to be intent on pulling a lot of players in now when they don't have meaningful games and they can get guys on the field and get guys in a camp. I think for fans, you're going to start to see Canada play good teams. Amy Walsh said this to us on the broadcast. They can get friendlies against good teams because it was a waste of time. And they'd have to take the money from Bahrain or from some other team to go and play them in, a random place on a random friendly date. And now I think you're at a time where Canada can start to line up some really difficult games and get themselves ready for what will be coming in 4 years, as well as trying to compete in Nations League. So I think those are two of the big picture things that fans should watch for.
I'm going to name one more: center backs. And this is true of every country in the world other than France. It's like nobody has enough good young center backs. I'm being more granular about this thing than David is, but I have confidence that Ismail Kone is going to develop and fill Atiba's shoes. I think Eustachio will be around. Sam Piet will still be around in 4 years. I really like Rita Zoer from Montreal. He'll take
another dual national, by the way.
Yeah, that's true. A Moroccan dual national. Yeah. He'll take Kone's minutes. I love Jaden Nelson as a central midfielder. I think he's I don't have concerns about the attack or the midfield or the fullbacks. I have concerns about the center backs, because if they're going to play a 4, which I think they might eventually do, Alistair Johnston, he's not a center back in a 4, and Kamal Miller is good, but he's the only one under age 35 who's playing at a high level among Canadian center backs. So they just somehow, some way, they got to hope that a couple of kids, whether it's coming out of USL or CSL or MLS, they have to hope that a couple of guys prove to be answers there.